inspire their people with stories of what God's doing through them and around the world. God has not called us to make just converts. He's called us to make committed followers. We've got to regularly put the work of the kingdom before our people and lay out that call and say, people, how can we step up and respond to God's call to make disciples?
Thank you for joining Mercy Today. How do mercy and compassion break down barriers and change everything? How do they bring hope? Be inspired as our guests share about the life-changing, soul-impacting work through the ministry of Mercy, Inc. and its partners. Here's your host, Dr. Dan Critchin.
Well, welcome. I'm really happy to have you here to join us on this episode of Mercy Today Radio. We get to tell the story of how compassion changes everything, and we get to tell the world about the great work of Mercy, Inc. My goodness, busy around the world. And these are people devoting their lives to serving God and helping people, touching lives and making a big difference. Where in the world are we going today? Well, we have been to Haiti, Africa, Latin America, South Asia, and today we're going to come back home. The discussion about God's work in those regions we have continued to cover, and today we're going to talk about the church in America. The American churches have provided great support for God's work around the world, missions, humanitarian service, all kinds of things. But not all churches and all pastors are equally supportive of that kind of work, of devoting resources and time and staff and everything else to foreign missions. So we have some real reasons for not supporting foreign missions, and we're going to talk about that. I was a pastor for 40 years, and a lot of my people in my churches, some of them very enthusiastic, send it all overseas, whatever we have. And other people are saying, no, we need to keep all of our dollars here. So I understand that reluctance. So we're going to talk today about this subject, foreign missions, problems and possibilities. So, listener, I want to welcome you to the discussion, invite you to lean in and open your heart and listen to the end. A lot of really, really good and important and valuable stuff here. Zooming into the studio today is Dr. Duane Brown, and he is the Director of Church Partnerships for One Mission Society. We might occasionally in this podcast refer to it as OMS, but it's a large mission support group that we have worked in, 90-some countries. Maybe Duane can help us with that. Dr. Duane Brown, thanks so much for zooming in today and for this show, and welcome to Mercy Today Radio.
Well, Dan, thank you. It's a privilege to be with you, and we've got to know each other a little bit preparing for this, and I so appreciate your heart for God's work, having been a pastor yourself, and really delighted to be here today.
Thank you. Let's launch right into it. American churches and pastors today, they struggle, because they got local things to meet. They got responsibilities. You got budgets. You got offerings. You got, you're trying to make everything work. And then we bring up the topic of foreign missions, and you're going to help us kind of get settled in on that. So, because when a church agrees to participate in foreign missions at any level, they are agreeing that the focus and the resources will be drawn away from the local congregation. And that's part of the tension. And so tell us, Duane, what are some of the very real concerns that pastors and churches have when they are looking at the issue of supporting foreign missions?
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate question. I was a pastor for 12 years, and I'm concerned about how do I take care of my local community. Mm-hmm. How do I keep people in the seats, so to speak, and the dollars in the offering plate so that we can take care of what we've got, around at our home. Dan, when COVID hit here back a few months ago, I was jumping on a podcast by a very well-known church consultant here in the U.S., and he was talking about how do we as a church kind of navigate this post-COVID world. And one of the first things he said was, we should just forget about global missions. We should stop giving and not even getting engaged in it. And I was completely blown away from that.
Yeah, it caught you off guard.
My heart is for missions.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should look at the issue as a problem to be solved all the time, but a tension to be managed. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we come back to the work of the kingdom, when we go into Matthew 28 and Acts 1 and verse 8, we see that God has called us to reach people in places local, places near, places far, and even places hard. And that's his call. God has reminded us over and over again, Dan, that he has no other plan but his church.
Yeah,
we,
exactly.
his people. It's the body of Christ. And it starts with us. The church is the hope of the world. And how we embrace that calling with all of our hearts, and how we as pastors relinquish the control of God's work to his Spirit, I think the more we are in line with what he's trying to do.
And maybe that opens up this question, because sometimes churches and pastors say, well, if we're going to commit some of our resources to foreign missions, we're just going to have to do without that. It's going to make us smaller, make us weaker, make us less resourced. But maybe you can help our listeners understand, how can commitment to missions make a church even better? So it's not like, well, we're going to be diminished a little bit by that amount. How can missions make a church better?
Yeah, and it does. And, it's counterintuitive for us as Westerners to think that if we go to the world, that we're going to lose out. But in reality, when we go to the world, it comes back on us locally. When we challenge our people, Dan, to get a global vision, and they begin to pray for and reach out to the world financially, when God calls people from our congregations to go on full-time or short-term missions, those same people, it's going to fall back on us as the sending body. The blessing is going to come back on us. I would take the example of my son, Eric. He is now a final semester student in engineering. When he started college about 4 or 5 years ago, prior to that, I'd take him on a mission trip. I led a team from my church, he and 5 other juniors in high school, on a trip to South America. You want to talk about life-changing for all of us. But those boys went there. They got a heart for the world. They got a heart for missions. Eric came back all revved up. He got engaged in his local church here. He's still engaged in the local church where he wasn't before. And at his convocation service, that was the first chapel service when he went to college, we were walking out to the car. And he said, Dad, I just know someday that God wants me on the mission field full time.
Wow.
I just know that's what God's called me to do. And so when we go to the world, when we give to missions, it always comes back at us. Dan, I would encourage all of our listeners to Google this phrase, churches that closed because they did or gave too much for missions. Go Google that and see if you find it. You won't. You just won't.
Well,
because it always comes back on us.
Yeah, because they gave too much. So you're mentioning a couple of passages that are dear to my heart, and it includes local mission, ministry, but also the foreign. And so when Jesus, among his last words to his disciples, he said, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, etc. That's referred to as the Great Commission. So he had a heart for the world, obviously. And then right before his ascension, and you had referred already to Acts 1:8, he says, wait in Jerusalem, and you will receive power, and you will become my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the world. I think we're talking missions there, because I'm sure that Peter and James and John had no idea even what uttermost was. I mean, they knew a little local geography, but Asia, Africa, not so much. But Jesus had that heart for the whole world.
Yeah. Pastors, we're about vision. We understand the power of vision, the power of why.
Right.
And one of the first things a pastor can do, and I was a pastor for 12 years in Nova Scotia, Canada. I planted a church. We have to ask ourselves, what is going to be the DNA of our church?
Right.
What are the core matters of our church? And it's got to go back to Acts 1:8 and Matthew 28, the challenge to go.
Yep.
All throughout Scripture, from the Garden of Eden to God's call to Abram to go to the nations and be a blessing. Mm-hmm. He said, Abram, if you will go in obedience, I will bless you, and you will be a blessing to the nations. And that's what pastors have to understand. Our DNA ought to be a blessing to the nations, to take the people and the resources out there to the unreached peoples of our world, to go and go deep with them. God has not called us to make just converts. He's called us to make committed followers of Jesus.
Yep.
And how do we take the Matthew 28 passage, the Acts 1:8 passage, when it says to go into the Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, how do we make that the DNA of our church? Once again, it's a tension we manage. not a problem we always can solve.
And you asked the question sort of in a rhetorical way, but can you give us a couple of ideas? How can a pastor or a lay leader, if the pastor is really not there yet, how can you help that become the DNA of the church? How can you help other people get on board with missions?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I worked with churches working in my second mission agency now, work with dozens of churches and helping them develop a strategy for mission. And I think as a pastor, we always started with a lead pastor. We helped the church develop a global vision. We always started with a lead pastor, and we said, Pastor, it begins and ends with you. It lives or dies with you. If you are not for missions, Pastor, and an Acts 1:8 view of missions, then we will stop right now. In fact, I remember being with a church where there was a change of pastors in the middle of our coaching, and the new pastor, he just wanted to control things. He wanted to control how much money was given to missions. He wanted to control, where the people went. And I saw that control problem. So, pastors can release that control. I think pastors have to model missions to their people. I think they need to communicate missions. They need to just communicate missions voraciously to their people. Inspire their people with stories of what God's doing through them and around the world. One of the greatest things I've noticed, one of the greatest challenges in the church when it comes to missions is just people say, well, nobody's engaged in our church in missions. And I say, why is that? And one of the very simple reasons is because we don't communicate and inspire missions to our people. We've got to regularly put the work of the mission, the work of the kingdom before our people and lay out that call and say, people, how can we step up and respond to God's call to make disciples? That can be from a 2-year-old who's raising pennies for a church in Afghanistan to an octogenarian, an 80-year-old person who's praying and working with packaging relief items to give compassionate ministries to another part of the world. So those are some ways that we can engage our people and set the tone for our church.
Yeah, beautiful. After our break, Dr. Duane, I'd like to have you discuss this. It seems to me that if you're just putting money into an envelope marked missions, or if that's your regular, even in the church budget, that's one thing. But to identify a people or a people group or a project or a need that people they'd get out their wallets because, man, we got to feed these hungry people, or we want to, sponsor these kids in Haiti or whatever. We're talking about the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, to personalize it and make it very real. So after our break, I'd like you to give us a little bit of info on that, the personalization of mission giving. So we'll be right back, folks.
Do you or someone you love need assisted living but are afraid you could never afford the cost? Glasswater Creek of Plainfield is for you. If you income and Medicaid qualify, you can move into Glasswater Creek for a fraction of the cost of market rate assisted living. Glasswater Creek of Plainfield is a game changer, bringing an affordable assisted living option to the west side of Indianapolis. Schedule your visit today at glasswaterplainfield.com or by calling 317-839-5808. That's 317-839-5808.
Here is Mercy Inc. Executive Director Doug Hoffman with another Mercy Minute.
One of my favorite projects that we have going is Shalom Africa. That is a program that we reach across the middle part of Africa, and we're working in rural villages that are needing help in agriculture development. They're needing help around reading and writing. They're needing the help of understanding who Jesus is. And so Shalom Africa is a program built to be able to work with local leaders in those communities to transform them, to empower them to mentor people on how to raise better crops, how to be able to take their crops to market, how to look at how do I vertically integrate my farm, and I might be raising maize and grinding feed to be able to feed to my chickens and then sell the eggs. That's the desire of Mercy Inc. in Shalom Africa.
I'm Brad Swinford with Salem Concrete Paving. It's a privilege to partner with Mercy Inc., who provides hope to people around the world by meeting critical needs and introducing people to Jesus. I know that through Mercy Inc., I'm investing in God's kingdom as they spread the love and gospel of Christ around the world. So please join me in supporting Mercy Inc. and MercyToday Radio by praying or going to their website at MercyToday.global. Thank you.
We are talking to Dr. Duane Brown, who is the Director of Church Partnerships for One Mission Society. We're talking about the subject, foreign missions, problems and possibilities, and we're touching base with some things that both Duane and I have been pastors, and we understand the tension. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about the personalization of missions, so we don't just write a check and hope it does some good, and call it missions. So, Duane, you said you had some good things to share about that. Let's hear it.
Yeah, well, one of it would be something current and then even farther back, several decades actually. But the idea of personalization is a term that has really come out of marketing. So marketers really think about how do we personalize, or, when we're selling something, so to speak, how do we connect that to the individual, their needs, their passions, their desires. And when it comes to missions and the call to missions, whether it's a short-term trip or giving your life and career to missions, I think that's a very key concept. In fact, George Barna, the Barna Group, just released a study called The Future of Missions. It just came out just in the last few weeks. I just got a copy of it. And one of the key pieces they found with engaging the Gen Z, in fact, any generation in missions, is this concept of personalization. And that means, how do we help people personally connect to missionaries who are in the field doing the work of mission? How do we create events or relationships? Because it's through that personalization that a person will develop a bonding and a sense of call to missions. They hear those stories. They hear about life change. They see their heroes out there. The people that go overseas and give their lives in cross-cultural ministry, they're my heroes. They have to give everything and go. And what resonates with me about personalization is I have been involved with a process that I've worked with, like I said, dozens of churches through. It's a process that's decades old, and it's rooted in the same concept of personalization. And it's bringing missionaries to your church. It's exposing your people personally to pray, to give, and to go in foreign missions. And it all comes back when you personalize missions, when you connect your people personally, and it touches on their passions, their gifts, their passions. It makes a difference. And, we talk about pastors and the desire for our local churches. As your people get a global vision, your church is going to grow locally, numerically, financially, spiritually. There's going to be renewal.
So let's back up and say that again. So what you're saying is, you said earlier that foreign missions is not a problem to be solved, but a tension to be managed. And now you're saying that there's going to be a net gain even in the local church if there's a commitment to foreign missions. Can you unpack that? We only have a minute for that section. Can you just give it to us quickly?
I think one of the best things a pastor can do is develop a strategic plan that encompasses all of Acts 1:8 mission. So God's mission, God has one mission. That's to the unreached, whether they are around the world or close to home, or whether they are refugees from another land coming to our back door.
Yes.
We have one mission to make disciples. That includes 4 quadrants geographically, so to speak. Keep those in balance.
That was short. It kind of caught me off guard there. So I'm looking at the timer here too, and we're going to have to wrap up this portion. This is the radio timed portion, but we're going to bridge over to the AfterWords where we can cover some more in depth. We want to talk about short-term mission trips. We want to talk about some reasonable goals or commitments that a local church could actually consider, and then you have something to offer, which is going to be, I think, a real benefit to our listeners too. So. We're gonna cover that in the AfterWords portion. For anybody listening, you won't hear those parts on the radio. If you're already on the podcast, it's going to come up. So just keep listening. But if you're listening to the radio, you want to go to our website, MercyToday.global. Go to the podcast and the shows, and then you'll hear the whole thing. So we are talking to Dr. Duane Brown. He is the Director of Church Partnerships for for One Mission Society. So, Duane, any final things on this radio portion you can finish with us?
Yeah, I think I would challenge every pastor to really develop a strategy for mission. You know, when I pastored, I never really had a strategy, a plan. If my district leader walked in and said, I want to see your plan for growth, I never really had one. And I think pastors need a plan that will grow their church, that encompasses all of Acts 1:8. I'd love if a pastor on this or a layperson on this radio broadcast today would love to reach out to me. I'd love to help them. I've worked with dozens of churches in developing a mission strategy that encompasses all of Acts 1:8. And give me a call and let's talk about making missions the DNA of your church, not just another program.
Perfect. Beautiful. And the way to do that, listener, pastor, or lay leader, go to our website, MercyToday.global, and just put in a word there that'll give us an idea. Put in Brown or Dr. Duane or any of those things. We will get back in touch with you. As you can tell, Dr. Duane Brown has a real passion for this work. So, Duane, I want to, just as we finish up here, you have a part of a book that you are co-authoring, co-working on, and
Yes.
We want to offer a slice of that or a summary of that. We'll just call it a PDF, whatever that ends up being. So can you offer that? Tell us a little bit about what it is, why somebody would want it, and then we'll talk about how we can get it into their hands.
Yeah, my good friend and accountability partner, Dan, has been working on a concept called net weaving. And he's been working on some of that for his class. And so he brought together 3 others of us for a total of 4 to focus on a section of this book where we look at the book of Acts and look at it from 4 different angles. Now, let me back off and say that net weaving, we base that idea off of Dr. Larry Martin. And when we think of net weaving, we can even think, well, what about, isn't that the same as networking? Networking, though, is often something we do for our own purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But net weaving is really seeing the work of God, the kingdom work, and finding ways to connect people, connect places, connect the power of the Holy Spirit so that there is a greater kingdom impact and mission being accomplished. And so 4 of us are working on each a section of this book about net weaving, where the first section is going to be people. So who are the people in the book of Acts that God used?
Mm-hmm.
And then we want to look at places. You know, there are coincidental and not so coincidental places throughout the book of Acts where God brought people together, some extraordinary, ordinary, unexpected, and even impossible places.
Yeah, exactly.
That God was still able to work. My friend Jeff is going to talk about the power of the Spirit from Acts 1:8. The Spirit descended upon the church in Acts 1:8, and it was through the manifestation of the character of God in the lives of his people, his very nature coming forward in changing people like Peter and Paul so that by his power they could go out and change the world. And then my section is going to be on possibility, and I'm happy to submit a PDF of what I'm writing about. But as we bring people and places and the power of the Spirit together, those 3 things, think about the possibilities that can happen. Think about how the gospel can be preached, how souls can be converted, how dead people can be brought to life, and sick people healed, all because we look at a net weaving. We look at the work of the kingdom through the idea of a net and how God is weaving all these things together and how we just need to grab on and become his fishermen and fisher women for the kingdom.
You say that in such a compelling way. Thank you very much. God bless you for that. And that sounds like a must read. I'm going to go get one of those PDFs, and a couple of different ways our listeners could do that. Always the go-to is our website, MercyToday.global. And again, just go to the contact form and just give us a clue. Just put PDF. That'd probably be enough. Put Dr. Brown, put Duane, put OMS, any of those things, and we'll contact you and make sure that we understand what it it is you're asking about, but we would love to get this into your inbox, but we'll have a way to get that PDF to you. You just got to get that. This is a way to, I guess I would say, actualize the things that we have talked about. It's about the Great Commission. It's about making disciples. It's about going to the uttermost parts of the world. It's about short-term mission trips. It's about all of that. And then Dr. Duane Brown, in his section, is about the possibilities of missions. We're going to wrap up this portion. I'll come back to close the show. We're saying goodbye to Dr. Brown right now, but we will pick it up on the afterwards. So keep listening. Hang in there.
This is Doug Hoffman, Executive Director for Mercy, Inc. Today I want to take you to Haiti. I want to talk to you about Bethesda Medical Clinic. Dr. Rodney there and his staff of 70 people, they've been around for over 60 years. And as they are there, they are making a difference in people's lives, not only physically by treating them for their medical issues, they're also bringing spiritual awareness to them. They're praying with every patient, not only at the time when they come in, but also as they're being healed. And that prayer difference is changing lives for eternity. They're leaving healed, or if they're taking medication and whatnot, they're going through that process. But if they can heal their soul for eternity, that is what Bethesda Medical Clinic is all about.
I'd like to give a big thank you to the Covenant partners who make this show possible in the Indianapolis area. Thank you to the Ron Blue Trust, Wisdom for Wealth for a Life. Find out more about this great partner on our website, MercyToday.global, and click on the Marketplace page.
This is Doug Hoffman, Executive Director for Mercy, Inc. I want to thank you for listening to Mercy Today.
Such important things, talking about God's work globally around the world, but also in our own community, in our own backyard. So if you have questions about today's topic or want to get in touch with Dr. Duane Brown, get to our website, MercyToday.global, find the contact form, give us a hint at what it is you'd like to say or to ask, and we would love to be in your inbox every Monday morning. We'll send a link to the show for that week. Love to have you there. So I want to thank you for listening, and this is Mercy Today, telling the story of how compassion changes everything. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Critchett, saying goodbye for now, and until next time, may God help you be a part of what He is doing in our world today. Join us at the table again. Join us in the circle. Find out where in the world we'll be going next. Find all of our shows and a whole lot more on our website, MercyToday.global. God bless you, my friend, and goodbye for now. And welcome to the afterwords. We have the before words, the during words, and the afterwords. Some things that we didn't get to finish talking enough about, so we want to bring that into this section. The clock is off, so we can chat some more. We've got Dr. Duane Brown here with One Mission Society. He is the director of church partnerships, talking about missions, foreign missions. And I'd like to go back to something that we almost got into, and that is, Duane, if you could help us understand from your perspective, what would be some reasonable goals for a church or a pastor to consider when it comes to foreign missions? We obviously have to have the whole picture in mind. You got to pay the church mortgage, you got to pay the staff, got to meet the budget, all that. Mm-hmm. What would be some reasonable goals for a church to be thinking about in terms of commitments to foreign missions?
Yeah, I think practically speaking, brother, one of the things the pastor can do is, from his perspective or her perspective, is begin preaching through the Bible with a lens of mission. Mm-hmm. The Bible is a missionary book from beginning to end. And if we take our people through the story of God's mission, then we are opening up for them. We're opening to them the power of the Word, which can change their heart and life.
Yes,
and they can capture that vision. I think another very simple, reasonable goal we can take is begin to think about who are we partnering with as a church to help us accomplish the Great Commission. A church in Wilmore, Kentucky cannot always reach the world, but it can partner with others who are reaching the world.
There you go.
And so who are those partnerships that we can form, that we can join with in another country that we're passionate about, and through that reach the world? I worked with a church one time that had a real passion for food. They love to eat as a congregation. And so they discovered that one of their passions was feeding people. And they began to think locally and even globally about how can they use their passion for food to change the world. So they partnered with a local food bank. They partnered with a ministry that feeds the hungry overseas. Those kind of connections. Another way, which is a great way that every church can engage in missions, and that is giving to missions, using the faith promise way of giving. Faith promise is a decades-old way of giving to missions.
Right.
If you've heard of that, Dan, you know that it's asking people to trust God to provide above and beyond their local tithe,
right,
and give that money to missions. And the money for missions comes out of the operating budget, and it's a separate fund. But we have worked with dozens of churches again in adopting a faith promise as a way to fund missions, and it really changes the game in terms of how much you have to give for missions.
Indeed. And I think it really is in the heart of the pastor, because as you talk about preaching through the Bible, even if you were to preach through the book of Acts and see that God has a heart for the whole world, and if my church is on my street corner and that's the extent of my vision, then I'm missing really the full picture of what Jesus came to do and the message that can and should be going to the farthest. In fact, when Jesus said to the uttermost parts of the world, I'm not sure we've even discovered all the uttermost parts yet, but we continue at that work. So let's talk about short-term missions. Years ago, I took my young family to Mexico. We're just building houses for the Oaxacans in northern. They had migrated to northern Mexico, and it was just such a profound, life-changing insight and inspiration. And I know that I will never be the same. And I know my kids who were young at the time, but they saw these little Mexican kids. We'd saw off a piece of a 2x4 to fit it into a window frame or something. And these Mexican kids would pick up that little end piece and play with it all day. And my American kids were, kind of dissatisfied not having the latest video game. But you get into somebody else's culture, and we were building a church there too, and you see the impact that, an American person of any age can go and be a part and see what God is doing through some committed people, the locals, the indigenous people, and also the missionaries. So then there's some pros and cons, I think, is what you mentioned about short-term mission trips. So speak to that a little bit, because that's got to be part of what you're promoting in church partnerships in American church.
Absolutely. As I mentioned before I came to OMS, I worked for another sending agency. And in one of our regional gatherings, we asked those who were serving in foreign fields, global fields, how many of you would say short-term mission trip was a catalyst for you? And most of the people, of our missionaries raised their hand.
Wow.
It is a powerful way for God to break someone's heart. I understand, Dan, that religion over the centuries has been harmful. We have been conquerors. We have, and I think we're afraid sometimes that we are just going to be we're going to get into that long line of people who have been harmful to the world because of missions.
Right.
Missions become vacations, we call them, or they become guilt trips.
Yep.
But there is so much good, Dan, that can be done when a church says, we're going with the right motives, we are going with the right partnerships in place, so that when we go there, when I led mission teams, I always attempted to let the field lead the team that I was bringing to us. We went, and then we surrendered our leadership to the field leaders and said, we are here to serve you. And, there were dangers done. I remember one time one of our folks had a real passion to share the gospel, and so he knew Spanish, and he shared Christ with somebody, and that person came to Jesus from that moment of sharing.
Yeah.
Who knows whether that made an eternal difference? We hope it did.
Right.
And I realize there's dangers to that, but there are so many more good things that can happen in the church when it starts getting a passion to do short-term missions and do them well.
Yeah, I think you raised sort of subliminally a point there that some people want to go on a short-term mission trip because it makes them feel better, especially if they can bring their stethoscope or their hammer, and join the team and help out. And God bless them. I mean, that's all good stuff. But we had on the show a little while back a guy by the name of Jim Kea with Empowering Lives International. And the way that he described and what they're doing is all about those local African people. And he said, and I said, can I bring people there? He said, absolutely, but don't encourage them to come to help. What I want them to do is sit at the feet, literally, of these African leaders and watch what God is doing. Then you are changed. You go back home and you say, my goodness, if I'm the pastor, then I want to take a new emphasis on that. I want to see maybe something of what they're doing can be applied and culturally adapted, for us. But it really changes your heart, whether you're a lay person or a pastor. And I just think that's really critically key. And thank you for doing that. I have one little bullet point here. I wonder if you have a thought on this. Can you share with our listeners I said the top 3, but any 3 things a short-term mission trip can do for an individual and a church? 3 things.
Number 1, it brings unity. When I led a team from my home church, the whole church got around. All 600 people really started to catch a vision for what we were doing. It's a discipleship piece. When we brought our people overseas, we spent 6 weeks discipling them in the faith, getting them ready for that.
Yeah.
Thirdly, it gives your church focus. It brings to the forefront the whole Great Commission because they see it happening as their people are going. So discipleship, unity, and focus are, I think, 3 general blessings that come when a church goes on missions. And, of course, the impact for the world, knowing that we've made a difference in some place around the world for good.
I love it. That's said so crisply and so well. Thank you very much. I can't imagine, and I hope there isn't such a thing as a pastor, an American church pastor, that is not interested in and committed to unity, discipleship, and focus. And that can really turn a church around because then you have focus. I mean, some of the churches that I know of, they say, well, we can't send money for missions because we got a lot of work to do here. Well, the truth is they're not doing a lot of work here even. They're paying the bills. And if they can do that, keep the lights on and keep the pastor paid, well, we'll call it good. No. So thank you, Duane. This is fantastic. Unity, discipleship, and focus. So, once we get some travel restrictions lifted, I personally want to be a part of hosting and bringing pastors to the various projects that Mercy is working on. And again, maybe we said it before, but you and I can talk about that because I think that's the heart change because you cannot come back unchanged. You cannot say shrug and say, meh, I went. It was interesting. The coffee was bad, and the floor is hard to sleep on. That stuff. And so our topic for this episode has been foreign missions, problems, and possibilities. And maybe I'll just cross out the word problems because it really is perceived problems for a pastor that just hasn't stepped over the line yet, is not sure what to do or how to do it or how much or, all of that. That's the kind of support and help that we need. So, Duane Brown, any last minute things before we wrap up this AfterWords portion of our podcast?
I would say go back to the scriptures, to God's word. And as you read through the Bible, look at it through the lens of mission. And see that from the very beginning to the very end, God is wanting to invite you into His story of mission. What can He do for you through you? Grab onto the net and become a fisher for Jesus. I think it's powerful, it's life-changing, and it'll give you a purpose every day that you wake up.
Beautifully said. As you were finishing that, I was thinking about some of the consultations that I've done with pastors and churches. I said, if your church doesn't have as its DNA the whole vision and mission of making disciples, then nothing else matters. So what? You get your meetings, you get your little groups, you pass the offering plate, you pay the bills. So what? But if you're not committed to the work of God and reconciling the world to himself and the whole process of being obedient to that great commission of making disciples, and Jesus said, of all nations, if you're not committed to that, then really nothing else matters. Is that overstating it, Duane?
Absolutely not.
There you go.
Good word.
Okay, thank you. That's it. I have a new brother here. We have talked a couple times on the phone, but this has been great. We're going to do another episode, so you want to be watching for that. So that'll wrap up this AfterWords portion. We have been talking with Dr. Duane Brown, the Director of Church Partnerships. I don't know if I even said that correctly. Is that
Church Partners?
Partners.
Church Partners.
All right, fair enough.
So you're close.
Okay. And that's it for now. So God bless you, listeners. Get in touch. Go to our website, MercyToday.global. Let us know how we can connect with you and you with us, and we'll go from there. God bless you.